I can't see how anybody would ever possibly have fun with it, yet somehow there's a bunch of people who like this game, which is truly mind-blowing. Maybe it's just because the honeymoon period hasn't worn off yet, the hype train is still going, but I have to imagine in the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a shit ton of people disillusioned with Bethesda, as they should be.
Yesterday was yet another bad day for Bethesda, as one of their devs, their story lead, Mr. Emil, he tried to take critics to task. He essentially tried to say that if you criticize Starfield, you're wrong because you're not a developer, and therefore you don't understand what goes into their games. You should even just be grateful that Starfield exists.
It does feel like this company is very salty about how people are very negative about Starfield. We saw this recently in some what appear to be like AI-generated reviews. Starfield isn't boring, actually, Bethesda tells Steam reviewers. They just were responding to almost every single negative Starfield review with AI-generated nonsense for the most part.
Today we're inside of Starfield, where a studio design director from Bethesda Game Studios has gone absolutely mental with the resonation behind Starfield on Twitter.
He thinks writing in games doesn't matter, it's pointless in an RPG, and that's why he's shocked that Starfield's gotten the criticism, not just for its lack of exploration, but also because the narrative is a joke. The main story, one of the least interesting Bethesda have ever crafted. And that's saying something, because a lot of their main stories are rubbish.
It is truly the most lowest common denominator goy slop shit I've ever touched.
Starfield multiplayer modders give up because the game is trash. That's just absolutely harsh.
Can you say fast travel? Fast travel. Can you say loading screen? Loading screen. Loading screen. Loading screen before fast travel? After fast travel. Loading screen. Fast traveling to complete a quest. Fast traveling to start a quest. That's so silly. Loading screen. Peekaboo. Loading screen.
Good to see you.
Well, here we are again to finish our autopsy on Starfield, the world's most majestic adaptive frame spamming simulator. So now we have the specifics out of the way, let us dive into a more diffuse rant about how this game failed to live up to the rather well-funded, heavily shilled, and frankly, blanket-bombed marketing hype. So what is my overall take on Starfield? Well, holy shit, where to begin? Someone, someday, will literally write a book about the pros and cons of this game. Perhaps a trilogy. But here goes. One way to explain how Starfield turned out like Starfield is to employ my favourite developer meeting thought experiment, and it goes something like this. Imagine the following hypothetical scenario that I'm going to fabricate, because it may well turn out to be exactly what happened. One bright sunny morning, Todd the Easter Bunny is real Howard walked into a room full of lead developers and some finance guys, and then someone in that room who has better lateral thinking skills than Todd, I legit thought she was Conscious Officer Howard, stopped sipping their flask of colonic cleansing fluid for a moment, paused and said something like this. Why don't we make a space exploration game? Leverage all of our design and mechanical assets from our previous games, use the building mechanics from Fallout 4, use the dragon mechanics from Skyrim for the flying alien bird things, use our normal workflow processes from all our other RPGs, procedurally generate lots of bland, generic, repetitive, soulless content, replace death claws with terramorphs, do a beautiful job reskinning and modelling everything so it looks pretty, insert a little 3D cockpit minigame to trick players into thinking that they are in space, use our bloat-arse archaic game engine to save money, because making a grown-up modern engine costs cash, right guys? Breaks our workflow practice, and that sucks. Let's smoosh this all together into one game, hope nobody notices the constant loading screens, or the fact that they ain't really exploring jack shit. Make it so fucking huge that people will be playing it forever, and let the modders fix all the bugs and glitches for us until we open up the in-game cosmetic store like we did in Fallout 4. Then we'll shut down the modders, sue a couple of them for copyright infringement, and forget that we liked the modders in the first place. And then Todd, this is a genuine $6 bill, Howard, will stride out on stage, tell everyone how there is 6 million times the detail, that there won't be any bugs, and with the help of some corporate lawyers, carefully dance around any deficit or omission in the game so that they don't get sued later. Then the most experienced developer in the room spat the corner of his comfort blanket out of his mouth, looked into the blank stares of the other people around the table and said, "Are you serious?" That guy got fired, and his overly ambitious and naive deputy got hired to take on the master plan. And this is how we got a space exploration game where you teleport from loading cell to loading cell, never really travel in space. Everything feels like Fallout 4, until you get into a fight with a flying creature and you realise it's a reskinned dragon from Skyrim. Sound about right? Everyone wanted Fallout in space, and this is why you have to be careful what you wish for. This literally looks, feels and plays like Fallout 4 in almost space, with a bit of interior design, artwork from Arcane Studios, some amazing costume design by the interns, and maybe just a little bad fucking first person shooting from id Studios. Those nice fellas that made that platform game. Now the game is frequently beautiful, the costume design especially is beautiful, the uniforms, guns, ships, the whole caboodle. I don't know what a caboodle is, but it must be nice because everyone keeps bringing it up. But Starfield is visually stunning a lot of the time. I catch myself thinking that every time I see a spaceship airlock door opening. But beware of any movie poster that says visually stunning, because that invariably means that the film has a really shitty plot. Oh, and did I mention that they removed all the gore? Apparently in the future, gore doesn't exist because it's too triggering for the snowflakes after the Great Reset. So despite shooting someone in the face at point blank range in 0G, there is not one drop of blood. This game is completely sanitised and fit for a 6-year-old. In fact, one person speculated that the reason you can't strip the corpses of their clothing is because they didn't even want to have naked ladies on the ground. We live in a post-Expanse world now, where we are used to seeing dead people's limp bodies clamped to the floor by their grab boots as the blood slowly leaks out of their forehead bullet wound in 0G. We're used to seeing people sucked out of airlocks into the cold vacuum of space. We're used to ship-to-ship combat where a frigate's chain guns shoot down the incoming enemy missiles. Starfield is a litany of missed tricks. It is a masterclass in cobbling together every trope it could find, but somehow managed to consistently omit the important ones. Perhaps even the essential ones. There is no gore, no land vehicles, no exiting your ship and floating around in space inspecting your ship from the outside, no blood, no decapitation, no visceral sci-fi space experience. The enemies you kill look and feel like ragdoll NPCs, and you feel like a player character, locked in your little box. You can only go from airlock to the ground via a loading screen. You can only enter your ship via a loading screen. You can only board another ship via a loading screen. It is a sanitised affair where you move from little box to little box. The freedom to go anywhere, as Todd, "Normally I last much longer than this, Howard," so famously said, is a lie. There is no freedom in Starfield. You just get loading screens as you transition from one virtual box to the next virtual box, and just in case that wasn't controlling enough, they removed all the gore from the game so as not to trigger any of the snowflakes. It's not even optional, for fuck's sake. Starfield locks you in your little box the whole damn time, and it suffers significantly because of its failures of omission. This is a space exploration game for the Reset Era generation, a controlling generation who probably want a future with no freedom of movement, where you're constantly policed from one box to the next. The obvious elephant in the room is the role of expectation in this game's reception, because it's not an objectively bad game as such. In fact, there are many parallels between Starfield and Cyberpunk 2077, inasmuch as that was also a game which primarily disappointed because they missold it, and this collided with the many unfinished concepts and launch day bugs. As I said before, if someone released Cyberpunk 2077 under another name, rebranded it and never mentioned the original tabletop game, people would have most likely loved it for 50 quid. Despite its many issues. But what they were marketing was not the game they were selling, and that is always a problem in the video game industry. Well, everyone assumed you would be jumping in your spaceship, flying around, landing on planets like a proper space explorer. Everyone assumed that there would be seamless transitions and you could explore the universe unimpeded. At the very least, I assumed that they would hide loading screens with lifts like they did in The Division, but apparently the game engine can't even handle that. And yes, in case you didn't know, apparently a lot of the elevators in The Division are secret loading screens, cunningly hidden from the player. Nobody had any reason to suspect that the Starfield universe would not be a literal 3D spatial universe, where you could traverse from point A to B in space. Starfield's 3D spatial representation of the universe is to the real universe what Cones of fucking Dunshire is to a real kingdom. Starfield space and planetary exploration is, in a sense, a board game, because you are moving from tile to tile, on the ground and frankly doing the same in space. When you fly to a planet, you exit the loading screen at the orbit location. It's a tile, it's a fixed spot. There's no substantive flying around in space. Every planet has its own fixed orbital landing tiles. That is certainly how it appeared to me. Todd Howard knew damn well people expected and wanted free-form space exploration. But at no point did anyone try and disabuse the public of their incorrect assumptions. They knew they were going to disappoint. Of course they knew there would be a reckoning, because what they made was this. You're in a city, you get in your ship, you get a load screen to take off with a cutscene. You're in space with virtually nothing you can fly to or interact with. You get a load screen to land on a planet, and you have a procedurally generated little area to explore, and you get there with another loading screen. Rinse and fucking repeat. It's like being on a film set, someone putting a bag over your head, they shuffle you into a VR arcade space ride, then putting a bag on your head, they shuffle you to a special effects studio, pull the bag off and say, pretend you're on a planet, but don't walk too close to the walls or that bag is going straight back on your head, sunshine. Starfield also has a windowing out problem. You see, it's actually boring at first. Some would say very boring. I would say it's dead fucking boring for at least the first 50 hours. When you start, you have a crap ship. No perks, no decent gear, most people can make short work of you and barely any clue where you're going. So you just pootle around doing your prescribed fetch quests, running from pillar to post, following NPCs slowly down corridors, enduring wave after wave of loading screens, waiting screens, cutscenes, and diabolically long dialogue scenes. If there is a single person on this or any other inhabited planet that has not skipped their way through at least a significant chunk of the dialogue, I would frankly be impressed by their discipline and grit. Now, don't get me wrong, 200 hours in, and I'm having a reasonable-ish, slightly dull, average time. And I'm sure I will gradually continue exploring the bloated and mostly room temperature content over the coming months. But facing down this game means that for many people the first 20 to 100 hours are going to be a huge, crushing chore of eye-blisteringly tedious proportions. Now that, right there, is a tough sell. Naturally, the combination of boredom, repetitiveness, loading screens, cutscenes, and waiting screens meant that Starfield kind of drove me to window out a lot. But at least whilst playing Starfield, I was driven to window out to some interesting, vaguely avionics and space-related content. This was a cracking video about an F-14 ejection. I watched quite a few Fusro Dar meme videos. And because I like tits, I found myself checking out these beauties. Playtex bras. So windowing out wasn't an entirely negative experience, and I learned a lot about spacesuits and how they relate to Playtex bras. But I have to admit that a couple of times an hour I just couldn't stop myself from windowing out and taking a little break when Starfield reached peak monotony. What's sad is that the game freezes when you window out, so it's not like it cut out any of the tedium, it just delayed it. Now that's something they should fix in a patch. And all of this reminded me of a negative Steam review I read. And to paraphrase, if you think the video game industry peaked with Fallout 3 and now it's okay for everyone to rest on their laurels and stop developing new ideas, then you will love Starfield. And maybe this is darkly and hilariously far more wise than anything I've ever said. Maybe Starfield is so tedious, not because it's particularly bad in any way, it's because consciously or unconsciously I have jumped through these precise same video game hoops tens of thousands of times over the decade in other Bethesda games. Speak to some NPC, they send you to speak to so-and-so. So-and-so is a bit of a dickweed. Kill dickweed. Run back to the quest giver for a fucking cookie. And in this case, quickly window out and watch 5 minutes of a video about how the nice bra making ladies made the Apollo spacesuits. Strangely, I never felt bored in Death Stranding, and nearly all of that game is fetch quests and walking for hundreds of miles in the pissing rain. There is some profound lesson there somewhere. Death Stranding is more interesting, engaging and satisfying than Starfield, yet nearly all it does is fetch quests and walking. We do need to discuss some of the wild claims that Starfield is relatively bug-free. I can only assume they fall into one of the following categories. Willfully ignorant. Haven't played for more than 3 hours. Have very low standards. Only play Bethesda games, so they don't realise that not everything is like this. Getting paid off by Bethesda. Or they are Todd Howard. Now I can forgive the first lot because they're just wrong. It's the last two that I'm concerned about because they are just bullshitting us. Because if you are claiming that Starfield is relatively bug-free, you are somewhere on a scale between willfully bullshitting and totally fucking delusional. As they say in Team America, we're gonna need a montage.
Our friend here showed me your sample.
listen. I don't mind at all. Go ahead.
Around here, people tend not to poke their noses.
Normally, I'd suggest you choose your words carefully so we could avoid bloodshed, but something tells me that isn't going to be possible.
Let's just forego any nuanced discussion about Starfield not being buggy. It is literally just like every other Bethesda game. To cite Todd, I am become bullshit, destroyer of truth, Howard, it just works. Then the game launches. And it doesn't. Setting aside all the usual BS with NPCs tripping out and ending up in walls, shit not working properly and spaceships taking off and leaving a trail of companions dribbling out of its arse like some kind of meat-based meteorite shower, more critically, certain quests will bug out and literally wreck your playthrough. Key faction quests are bugging out and reloading an earlier save won't even help you. Your playthrough is now terminally fucked. Permanently. So if you want to become a pirate and the pirate quest wigs out, you start from scratch or give up on your dream. Starfield is a shit show of bugs. Everything is bugged. The bases are bugged. 2 of my ships disappeared. One time I swapped ships and just the interior disappeared. One time the game kept teleporting me miles away from the ship every time I landed at a base. I gave up using my captain's locker because it kept snaffling away all my valuable stuff. I got a letter from my chubby parents asking me to visit, and they naturally vanish for days in-game. I got stuck in a flight sim and had to research console commands in order to unglue my character so I could continue with the faction quest. Whole bases have discombobulated themselves. Several game systems don't work. And it's become clear that the in-game weapon stats barely correlate with themselves at times, let alone with the actual damage they do. People need to stop making excuses for Bethesda. Todd, I shit lies into my cupped hands and throw them through the bars of the cage Howard, swore this was well polished and had barely any bugs for a Bethesda game. As did the press releases, and most of the Access reviewers. Yet here we go again, with another bugfest Bethesda game. So what do people do? They put on their dunce caps, stand in the corner of the classroom, voluntarily I would note, then start shouting, "It's got bugs, but it's a Bethesda game, so we expect it to have bugs, so it's okay." Similarly, Todd, I would set fire to a tramp and claim it was caused by lightning. Howard, yet again, has been exaggerating and telling lies all the way through the launch, and people have been making excuses about that too. Claiming stuff like, well, Todd Howard does tend to get a bit overexcited and exaggerate a bit. He is an S-tier sociopathic corporate bullshitter. You could drown his dog in front of him and he'd probably respond by asking you to hurry up so he can take a picture. If he is lying, it is not only deliberate, but the scope, nature and wording of those lies have been planned, rehearsed and scripted in a meeting with PR and legal. Let's just settle this shit once and for all. Todd Howard always lies. Bethesda games are bug-riddled by default. Bethesda overhypes their games. There are no excuses, and prior transgressions do not grant license to let them off, because, and I quote several random idiots when I say, well, they always do that, don't they? A judge would not let a serial murderer off with a warning just because he's always doing this kind of thing, so we should just expect it. Now, this does not in and of itself make Bethesda games bad. Some of them are brilliant, but nobody should be facilitating and excusing their failure to beta test properly, or defend their habitual dishonesty. I could not fail to notice that Starfield is set in 2330, which was strangely symbolic. They could have set it at literally any reasonable date in the future, but are we supposed to believe that it was 100% accidental that it is set on that precise year, ergo the tricentenary of 2030, a date synonymous with a whole swathe of nonsense global diktats? For those of you who don't know, the year 2030 is the date set for so many weird and wonderful World Economic Forum, World Health Organization and UN deadlines that someone would be forgiven for thinking it surely can't be a coincidence that so many disparate unelected institutions all miraculously pick the same damn date for all of their strange and wonderful plans, including mandates on the environment, property ownership, energy usage, global equity and equivalent top-down decrees. 2030 is the year set for zero carbon deadlines, Klaus Schwab's Great Reset, the World Economic Forum imperatives on a global society, Stage 2 of the UN's wank agenda, the completion of CBDC rollouts, and a shit ton of other initiatives that none of us get to vote on. Now, I'm not claiming that this is some kind of Jonesian conspiracy, but I can tell you right now that someone at Bethesda got a big ESG pat on the bum for setting the game on the tricentenary of what many are starting to worry might be the end of civil liberties globally. You eat bugs, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Pronouns, non-binary sexual identity. See a picture forming here? I will leave it to the individual cynic to make up their own minds, but I will just say this. Starfield ticks every World Economic Forum and UN box, and it's set exactly 300 years almost to the day of the proposed Great Reset, as outlined in Klaus Schwab's book The Fourth Industrial Revolution. These are the facts. I will let others don the tinfoil hat and decide for themselves, but let's just say Starfield has gender reassignment clinics, and leave it at that. On a happier note, some of the dialogue options are genuinely hilarious. We think your church might be connected to a group of space weirdos. These golden lines were sadly few and far between, but I'll give them credit for a few one-liners that genuinely made me laugh. Yes, most of the dialogue comes across like it was done using AI, and I skipped my way through most of it, but there were a few diamonds in the rough. This said, I successfully romanced companions and completed my quests almost exclusively by skipping the dialogue, because if you are used to playing Bethesda games, you can guess what the right thing to say is from the options. You don't need to know what the other person said. That was sad and predictable. Now, Fallout 4 was far from perfect, but it did have some cracking characters, some brilliant stories and some occasionally superb dialogue. Here in Starfield, not so much. Maybe at some point I'll try and play for 2 hours straight, skipping all the dialogue, because I reckon it's possible, and I doubt the game will be diminished. I'm sorry, but this game might have broken records on the amount of voice dialogue, but it certainly failed on quality. It is possible to fill a swimming pool with 1 barrel of beer if you water it down enough. And that right there is the dialogue. It's very watered down beer. Possibly non-alcoholic beer. In fact, I'm trying right now to think of a positive example from any of the quests, and my mind is blank. As blank as the people who wrote these scripts. Sorry, but like I keep saying, quantity has a quality all of its own, but quantity is not quality. The new lockpicking mechanism was not as terrible as I suggested. It makes no sense that you use a monocle to pick a digital lock, but at least it's a new mechanic. It's basically an optoelectric mishmash of puzzle elements where you visually align things to fit in slots on multiple layers of complexity based on the difficulty of the lock you are trying to pick. Or in this case, technically, a hack? I will admit it is nonsense, but it's also not the most depressing system I've seen. Let's be honest, if they busted out the same old tired lockpicking mechanism at this point, they would have been bashed with memes. The new system's fine. Still inferior to Hogwarts Legacy, mind. The bases, ergo the outposts in Starfield, don't seem to have a point. They seem to primarily exist in order to manufacture stuff you only need because you require stuff to research more base designs. So you can build more complicated outposts that don't really serve any purpose. Now there are a couple of exceptions to this. There is a major plot event where building a defensive base is important and you need to build at least one base to build adaptive frames so you can power level. Read cheese the XP whilst you sob into your keyboard. But essentially, beyond playing Doll's House, they exist primarily to service their own requirements of existing. Everything that you can do in a base, you can do elsewhere, with very few exceptions. So one tiny base with iron and aluminium and a landing pad is functionally enough. It's fun building them for a while, I'll give them that, but very quickly you realise that they are functionally pointless, beyond playing your little game of Doll's House. The vendor credit cap and weight of shit you make means selling adaptive frames is about as efficient as any other way of grinding out cash. Plus you can grav jump out of any fight, so it's not like having a friendly base nearby makes for an invaluable safe haven. To use some examples of good base mechanics, how about this? Valheim and Fallout 4 on survival mode. In those games, bases were creative, fun, and very functional, because having a place to hide, rest up and seek refuge, and essentially not die, was critically important. If you were travelling a long distance, you wanted to hop from base to base, using them as safe sanctuaries, because YOLOing across the entire map in one go was excessively dangerous. Unfortunately, in Starfield, the outposts don't serve that functional purpose. You don't need to hop from safe haven to safe haven, so effectively they're now virtually redundant. And I think this is a much bigger problem for the game than possibly they realise, and it will cripple the fun in survival mode when they inevitably roll it out. Bases don't have any real point, because you don't need to seek refuge in them, and you don't need them to feel safe. You don't have an emotional attachment to them like in, say, player housing in Fallout New Vegas. They didn't really think this through. You see, the combination of jumping to other star systems to avoid a scrap and the inclusion of starship modules effectively makes bases redundant and less safe. I can build a ship with a bed and all the workbenches I need. If I need safety, I can just jump to a friendly system. If I need to pick up some missions, I can do that from the landing pad in New Atlantis. Being able to effectively turn your own spaceship into a base, combined with the endless fast travel via jump speed, means player housing and outposts are effectively pointless. I suspect that survival mode might end up being a bit pointless in Starfield, and this duplication of player needs in both the ship and on the planet's surface accidentally broke this game. Why go to your player housing in New Atlantis to grab a nap? You can do it in your own ship, with less loading screens, less walking and just as much safety. Credit where credit is due. I don't know the why and the wherewithal, or which development teams did what and why, but the location Red Mile, for some strange and inexplicable reason, does not have loading screens when you enter. You can run up to the building, get through both airlock doors and be in the bar with 0 loading screens involved. I don't wish to behave like a backseat developer, but possibly the team of developers that designed the Red Mile should make all of Bethesda games from now on. At least start them off in charge of the DLCs and see how that pans out. That said, they might want to fix the problem with the hostile aliens walking into the bar and kicking off a giant bar fight. It is funny, but it's rather annoying. I did think a lot of Starfield looked quite pretty at times though. I mean, not the planets. Despite the subpar graphical quality and the lack of Nvidia support and the dated game engine and the uncanny valley NPCs. But I did snigger when I heard Bethesda had been referring to their art style as NASA punk, like it was a thing that they invented and they were so up themselves they decided to name it. Like someone claiming they invented retrofuturism 6 months after the release of the movie Alien. Half of the art design looks like it was lifted straight out of The Expanse. So yeah, it looks nice, but they need to get over themselves because they're acting like the last 50 years of sci-fi TV, film and video games never happened. So yeah, beautiful at times, primarily aspects of specific designs, but nothing original, and most of the planets are so generic it will make your balls ache. Possibly this is an indicator of particular individuals shining, but it was strange that most of the time the game looks generic, but then you would see one gun, one airlock or one outfit and think, Christ, that is really nice artwork. Starfield also has a massive interactivity problem. You will spend far too much time staggering off your ship, carrying several tons of crapola, desperate to sell it to any bidder. For a game where you spend so much time in loading screens, it is literally quite impressive how they managed to keep so many of the vendors at max range from the fast travel points. Now add to this that most are capped at 5,000 credits, resetting them means sitting down somewhere for 24 hours universal time, but the local time might be massively out of sync, which means you might have to wait multiple times, or wait longer than strictly necessary because you couldn't be fucked to get out a calculator. This is also combined by the fact that the mission boards are inconveniently located in bars and generally away from where your ship lands. Glorious. This is a layer cake of unnecessary fuckery and slow walking. Forget 2330, in 2023 we can sell our shit online and order cabs and take gig work from our phones. You would imagine that in 300 years time I would not have to physically get out on my spaceship and go run over to a mission board in the back of a bar to get my next bit of work. And why bars? In the future, do only drunk people do work? It is supremely dumb that I frequently fly half the way across the universe to my base just to pick up more missions, because it saves me a half a mile jog across town. And all of this, in no small part, wrecks the spatial impression of this game. I will sometimes use my jump drive to travel vast distances through space because the loading screens don't take any more or less time. It's just a loading screen, and that mission board in New Atlantis is a really short jog from my ship, so I might as well just go there. And this utterly annihilates your psychological immersion in this apparently vast universe. It's a little bit like how air travel diminishes people's appreciation of how big the world is. Because taking a 3-month boat cruise really forces the issue into your psyche. Well, in Starfield, nearly everywhere is always one loading screen away, so you never really feel like you've been anywhere beyond that dot or this dot on the map. It is worth noting that some of the permanently online and easily triggered are complaining that Starfield is promoting space neocolonialism. I'm completely down with that. I think space colonialism is awesome. We should ideally be doing lots of it and travel the universe, digging up their valuable minerals and making stuff with it. GG, well played. Honestly, I really can't give these people the time of day, to be fair, but I will say this, I find it immensely curious that Reset Era love this game. It's got the woke seal of approval from that festering hotbed of socialist game Nazis. So mission accomplished, Bethesda. They clearly pandered to this crowd, and this crowd are pleased. Shame it's just the customers who think it's bland woke crap. The repetitive quest design is also a crushing problem. Now keep in mind that there have been quests in previous Bethesda games that have literally choked me up, so they used to be able to really pull out all the stops. But generally in Starfield, it's the same tired old shit, with maybe 1 in 100 quests having any content at all that is worth paying attention to. Video game script writing and story design is frankly in a crisis at the moment, and this game is testimony to that. You just cannot write groundbreaking scripts in an environment where you are legally compelled to 1. Not cause offence to anyone, 2. Comply with your company's ESG commitments in avoiding reputational risk. This is a legalese way of saying you agree not to associate with or be involved with anyone, anything, or any concept that is deemed wrongthink. 3. Avoid any social media backlash from the permanently offended, and by implication, 4. Appease the blue-haired Nazis on the industry hotbed of fascist thought police and communist degenerate shithole that is Reset Era. A forum where all the wokies and activists in the gaming industry hang out and fire-start triggered social media outrage campaigns. It's a first-string fuckhole of fools and spiteful cretins that has, by sole virtue of people pandering to it, essentially become the communal Bilderberg group of video game social politics. How the hell are you going to write a truly creative game story with meaningful, earthy and challenging dialogue when you are simultaneously trying to comply with this set of ideological prescriptions? I mean, it's literally there writ large. Ergo, how can you be challenging and not challenge people? This is why so many of the quest stories in Starfield read like something you would see in a pre-Culture War children's book. In fact, it's not even that good. Old school kids' books were scary and morally ambiguous. In modern day video games, Starfield being a particularly refined example, the majority of your quests are mundane shit like 1. That man is bad, go and kill the bad man. 2. I need stuff, go and get me the stuff. 3. Monster is in the basement, go and kill nasty monster. And until video game developers say fuck this and try and fire up a paradigm shift, this is all we're going to get. And most likely, when developers do try and break the mould, all the other developers will attack them. Like what happened with 6 Days in Fallujah. We need our Quentin Tarantino moment in video games to break us out of this level of safe and formulaic writing. I worry it might be years before decent characters and risk-taking plots come back. How is the player supposed to lose themselves in the world of Starfield when everything is so uncontroversial and bland? We're supposed to believe that these guys were recently at war, but I can barely tell the difference between one faction and the next. The Crimson Fleet might behave like comedy pirates at times, but generally, most of the characters all over this world are generic, inoffensive robots with dull scripts, dull personalities, dull problems and dull backgrounds. You could swap 90% of the NPCs to other locations in this game and nobody would ever notice. It's not like Skyrim where different areas had different attitudes and a distinct feel. Nearly everyone in Starfield is a generic peon, busy being a good obedient citizen without a single bad thing to say about anyone, including the people they were just at fucking war with. Good stories have to have conflict, but in Starfield everyone is trying so hard to be a good non-binary citizen and not trigger anyone that everyone seems like an automaton, or they've been sedated. It's like this game got quality controlled by a healthcare trust that specialised in anxiety disorders and it got a gold star. There's no conflict, there's nobody saying anything nasty, there's no character, there's nothing challenging. And that is why I don't give two fucks about any character or anything in Starfield. They could all get eaten by fucking space lizards tomorrow and I would probably just pull up a deck chair and watch the show. As I've said before, there's a problem with hiring writers, artists and creatives who haven't lived. If all you know is video game writing or video game art design, then you're going to do dumb stuff. and that shines brightly in Starfield. Here are some specific examples to make my point. This is the world's least functional carabiner. The person who designed this clearly doesn't know how carabiners work. Here is an attachment point on a jacket. The person who designed this doesn't know anything about webbing. The webbing should be wider, or the D-ring should go through both hoops. Hung like that, it would immediately fall out of position due to gravity and sit on the piss. Then there is the quest where the girl doesn't know what dog tags are. The girl has been stranded on a planet for years with 2 people wearing dog tags. There is no radio, TV, no fucking Netflix, no entertainment at all beyond sitting around the campfire, peeling space potatoes and grumbling. Are we to believe that this inquisitive young girl at no point bothered to comment on why she was the only person not wearing the only jewellery in her group? You would postulate that after 10 years of nothing to do apart from chat and get bored, they would know every little fact and nuance about each other. Yet apparently she never asked about the jangly metal dog tags that everybody else had apart from her. So this writer clearly knows nothing about the military, nothing about dog tags, nothing about sitting around a campfire being bored, or maybe they just never spent more than 10 seconds not obsessing about their socials. They say write what you know, and just like getting gun-ignorant people to design guns in video games always produces ludicrous weapons, like Starfield, hiring writers and designers who have no familiarity with their subject matter makes for some hilarious results too. I'm not saying they are bad at what they do, I'm merely pointing out that you regularly see or experience things in this game and you just find yourself mouthing the words, fucking interns. And don't even get me started about the Sarah Morgan dialogue. Jesus Christ on a pogo stick. It's like it was written by some safe space coordinator with 3 months of online counselling training. Her dialogue is a painful exercise in fifis.
Please, it's not you. It's me. I'm just not ready to get that close. I can't. Not now. But thank you for being there and listening. It helped. It really did.
The perk system is interesting. It was not what I was expecting, and deviates from both the Skyrim and New Vegas perk models, because you don't really learn by doing. Essentially, perk advancement is gated by chores, for reasons nobody will ever fully figure out. If, let's say, you want to get better at shooting people in the face with shotguns, you put one hard-earned and slow-to-grind perk point in shotguns, which then flags up your homework for the week. Usually something along the lines of, shoot X amount of people in the face. Then once you have finished capping that chore, it unlocks and lets you put the next point in the same thing. I guess the logic here is it stops people drinking 7 litres of energy drink while spending 48 hours straight spamming adaptive frames until they have hundreds of spare perk points and then insta-leveling to God mode. So yes, I can see what they did here from that perspective. Personally, I was hoping that it would be like Fallout New Vegas, where once you maxed out on perks, you could still unlock these other shadow perks by doing certain things hundreds and sometimes thousands of times. It was a nice touch that made you feel that doing stuff still had purpose long after you were technically max level. That said, Starfield has no technical level cap, which personally I like. It's a feature that somewhat takes the edge off the grind, knowing that there is at least some purpose to what you're doing when at endgame, given that there are apparently 328 max perk points to invest, and even I would struggle to spam adaptive frames for that long. All this being griped, overall I like the general cut of the perk tree's jib. There are lots of interesting perks. Leveling can be slow, so choices matter. The perks you select fundamentally affect how you can proceed within the game. Until you are high level, of course. But let's just say that this is a perk tree where clearly they were planning on people doing enormously long playthroughs. And I will stop here as my singular concession to avoiding spoilers. Now, whilst overall the perk system was good enough, I can't shake the feeling that it's simply designed this way to hinder power levelling, and that alone. It just inserts sometimes many hours of game time or vast amounts of cash between levels of certain perks. And if this is the main reason why, then it's really just a cynical ploy to steer people into higher levels of engagement. There are, however, some real problems / bonuses from compounding perks in combat. Basically, using sniper rifles as an example, there are a bunch of perks that overlap this. So if you invest in all the stealth, marksmanship, sniping and ballistic perks, they all seem to stack up to an unhealthy degree, and indeed multiply up until you are chaining giant alpha bombs into targets. One man's broken is another man's awesome, I guess. But I can see why the stealth sniping meta is so prevalent in Starfield. It's a way to bring the maximum number of perks to bear, all at the same time, on one weapon, cover it in a generous coating of stealth benefits, and then slap a 4-digit alpha strike in some alien space vagina. The spaceship UI is hilarious, and I hate to say it, but I called this. Your real UI is your player HUD, and the cockpit visuals are primarily just for flavour. There are a few little readouts that show random stuff that, with your ship's activity, most of it's just fluff, frozen dials and pretend buttons for your player character to press randomly, like a toy driving set on the back of Dad's seat. The central panel is conspicuously blank, and you can bet your arse that at some point they had ambitions of putting a 3D radar readout there, but it probably got scrapped because of time or budgetary constraints. I say this for 3 specific reasons. 1. The large blank square on your control panel sticks out like a sore thumb. 2. It is generally where other spaceship games have their 3D radar. 3. The absolute lack of any 3D spatial representations is a glaring omission. It's a game where you have to have battles in 3D space, yet the only thing you can do is stare out of your little cockpit and try and guess where the ships are based on the little arrows at the edge of the circle. Unless of course they're right in front of you. It's a shit system basically. It's allegedly a 3-dimensional battle game with no 3-dimensional instrumentation. Even fucking Spitfires and Messerschmitts had rear view mirrors so you could see behind you, and wide open cockpits so you could look up and to either side of you. Now, we are supposed to believe that futuristic spaceships in 300 years' time have no 3D spatial proximity radar combined with an over-the-bonnet field of view that would make a tank driver cringe. Even bloody cars today have like little radars on the back of them that warn you when you're about to reverse into something. In Starfield, you just have to peek out the front of the little porthole in front of you. I will call it now. In a future patch, they will introduce a 3D spatial radar system. You heard it here first. Starfield has a problem with engagement. Now, Starfield is huge, expansive, with lots of systems and lots to explore. However, it is crushingly bad at managing the whole experience. I was struggling to figure out why the game felt like a chore for so long, and eventually came to the following hypothesis. Amongst others, in a lot of deep games like this, intentionally or accidentally, the game essentially gives the player managed Dunning-Kruger syndrome. Dunning-Kruger syndrome is basically a psychological term, which explains how people who are experts tend to rate themselves less skilled because they are knowledgeable enough to appreciate that there is so much more to learn. And similarly, ignorance is bliss, inasmuch as people who are ignorant and only know a little bit about a topic tend to think they are vastly more informed and competent than they really are, because they don't realise how much they don't know. It interfaces with other aspects of personality, like being generally humble, or having a proclivity for behaving like an arrogant little bitch. 2 perfect examples of both ends of this spectrum are these. Walking out of a school exam thinking you did a terrible job, because you know so much about the topic, you fixated on all the knowledge you didn't have time to write down. Then you get an A+ when the scores come out. Or the diametrically opposed scenario. Some prick watching a 3-minute YouTube video about a complex geopolitical situation, and then immediately marauding the internet, slapping people in comment sections of other videos, correcting them about everything because they are too pig ignorant and narrow-minded to realise that their 2 factoids, both of questionable validity, does not trump 7 years of study and a decade of experience in the field. Everyone has at some point run into someone who thinks they're an expert based on a tiny bit of knowledge, and they are just too damn stupid and badly informed to understand how stupid they are. Well, I bring up the Dunning-Kruger effect because when a deep video game with lots of complicated systems does it right, it tends to give the player a certain finite set of activities, which they can master, which makes the player feel competent, like they are mastering the game. Then it gradually unfolds more stuff, which is initially challenging, but the player learns how that shit works too, and starts to feel once again like they have mastery over the game. Now, at any given point in the early to mid game, the player might only understand 1% of what's going on, but they are under the illusion that they have gained mastery over the game. Think of a game like classic World of Warcraft for the new player. You're level 42, you bought your first shitty mount, you have your blue bit of armour, you are boosting your mates through low level dungeons, and you think that you are king of Barons chat. You are blissfully unaware that you are ignorant. You have no clue that the game really begins at level 60. You haven't even joined a guild yet. You don't even know that Endgame content exists, or what a raid is. You are a clueless noob, but whilst you trundle around in your little cloud of ignorance and local mastery, you feel like you are getting the hang of it. Little do you know that you are only on the 3rd rung of the getting the hang of it ladder, and that ladder goes up the side of a skyscraper. This is why I think Starfield has a huge engagement problem. It's why I think this game is so boring at first, and certainly why 30 hours in I was still not feeling it in the same way I was swept up by Skyrim, Fallout and other games. You start out as a miner, doing shitty chores, get adopted by some space weirdos, and then the game hurls a bunch of game systems at you immediately, most of which you can't even try to level up until you have spare perk points to invest to unlock the true depths of your incompetence. You have workbenches you can barely use, on equipment you don't understand. Your guns are shitty. The enemies can hit you like laser beams across the map and through obstructions. You have a space map, so you can get reliably lost all the time. Everything is hard to navigate, and the menus are clunky. Just managing your inventory might require a YouTube guide, thanks to the monumentally unintuitive and obtuse options. Everything is complicated, everything is a ball ache, you can't really do much. It is constantly impressed upon the player that the game is bigger than you. It's expansive, complicated, confusing, and there is lots and lots to learn. And you need about 50 fucking perk points to start this journey, and they only come around about once every 3 hours. And this all synergises into creating this feeling that it's your first day on the job, it's going to take you years to be fully trained, the pay ain't that good, the girl bosses are pissing you off, and frankly, you don't even know if you're going to stick around for long. They completely balked up the engagement in this game. And sure, it gets better and better as you play more, but for me, personally, and taking into consideration that I love Skyrim and Fallout, the whole of the early game was a massive, fucking, woke, boring shag. The game's introduction should win an award for being undramatic. There you go, mate. We gave you a shit job as a miner, but you lost that on the first day. Here's a bag to carry all your stuff around. We ran out of large bags, so you'll have to make do with this little shopping bag. And don't forget to take this important resource gizmo, which weighs 10.5 fucking kilograms. Off you fuck. Oh, and sorry you don't get a local map. We couldn't be bothered to make them, but you do get a really confusing star map. Good luck memorising where everything is. Oh, and there are some workbenches for you to use. Good luck with that, because you're too much of a dumbass to know how to craft anything useful. Right, off you trot. Maybe you might start enjoying yourself in a week or two's time. Maybe. Now I'm sticking with this game because I still have suspicions that I will like it more eventually, despite its flaws. Sometime around 2025 or 2026, and after all the DLCs come out. But if people are quitting because they think it's boring and obtuse, well, that is probably because, for a lot of people, the game is boring and obtuse. And they have too much stuff to do in real life to invest hundreds of hours in the hope that this video game might get better. I have no doubt some people will rack up 5,000 hours in this game and still be playing it in 5 years' time. Possibly, I might even be one of them, dipping in for a few hours a week just because I want to fly around in my pink spaceship and possibly find that one thing in the game that's interesting. But make no mistake, the game is very boring at the start, and by start I mean at least the first 50 hours. Starfield does not handle the Dunning-Kruger effect very well at all. It sits you down at the start, impresses on the player that everything is confusing and there's lots to learn, gives you the world's smallest inventory, a barely intelligible UI with which to try and navigate the game world, forgoes the pat on the bum and casually kicks you out the airlock. This shit might fly with die-hard Bethesda fanatics or people who like their games to feel like graft, but it precisely does not have universal appeal. And Bethesda has done this shit so much better in the past. And let's not forget that Skyrim had a fantasy escapist thing going on. Starfield has not captured that to the same degree, or perhaps at all. We already have lasers and spaceships. Sure, our lasers are a bit shit, and our spaceships don't go very far, but it's not the escapist goldmine it was 50 years ago. Now add to this that the player will spend an unhealthy amount of time inside buildings that frankly look like offices. The escapism factor in Starfield simply cannot compete with Skyrim's dragons, magic, vampires, werewolves, fantastic open world scenery, oldie worldy town squares, and epic locations like the caverns of Black Reach. The world of Starfield is sadly a bit like a woke version of Idiocracy. It's like waking up in 300 years' time and discovering that the Great Resetters won. All the idiots that annoy you on social media finally got their way, and you face a life living in pods, eating bugs, doing gig work, and hanging out in a boring politically correct spacefaring civilization where everyone is dull. There is no escaping the fact that Starfield has a case of stage 4 terminal wokeness. It is Klaus Schwab's wet dream and systematically ticks off every single World Economic Forum and UN 2030 trope, with the possible exceptions that we still have some privacy and agency in the world of Starfield. You can't pick a sex. You are some manner of non-binary cuck. You are forced to assign yourself pronouns. You literally eat bugs. If you pick up and examine a menu in a cafeteria, everything is vegan. The packets of meat seem to be synthetically grown in a lab. If you drill down into the fine detail of this world, you come to the uncomfortable conclusion that someone at Bethesda HQ has been sitting there watching World Economic Forum videos and dutifully compiling a checklist of tropes about the Great Reset. I'll forgive the universally bisexual companions because Bethesda has been doing that for years. But there is a plot about a transgender clone which was cloned in another sex. It's funny how everyone is non-binary and there is no such thing as biological sex, right up until the moment that someone comes out as gay or decides to have a sex change. But I digress. I have no particular issue with the majority of all the individual progressive elements in this game. My issue is with the grand sweep, the quantity and the abundance of woke drivel that drips out of the pores of this game. 99.9% of the people playing this game won't have gender dysphoria, 98% of the people playing this game will be straight, 100% of the people playing this game will be revolted at the very notion of eating bugs. Apart from the Chinese. And possibly the French. And like other Bethesda games which balance this stuff a lot better, I'm all in for some inclusivity and some diverse stories being told. I have no issue with the individual issues. But you would assume, given the ridiculous pampering and abundance of progressive content in this game, that it was specifically being marketed to the Wi-Fi password community. Is it so hard to make an RPG these days where I can fire it up without feeling like I'm being sent to one of Trudeau's social media sensitivity classes? And just to underline it, and this might be a spoiler for some, remember Klaus Schwab's now infamous line about "you will own nothing and you will be happy"? Well, let's just say, if you played this game all the way through, then you know what I'm talking about. I think Starfield is one of those games where you could do a first impressions video and review and then a follow-up video after 1000 hours, and they would all be fairly different. Unless of course you're being paid off by Bethesda and reading off your list of key talking points. You know who you are. My point is that my first impressions of this game was that it was a slightly offensive, boring, woke mess. My review finds this game to be a firmly offensive, boring, ultra-woke mess. And maybe, in the future, with quality DLC, or finding some hidden content I haven't yet found, it might get better. But I will say this, despite requiring several attempts to get hooked with Fallout 3, after 20 hours I was sold. I was sold in under 20 hours in New Vegas, Fallout 4 and Skyrim. I'm hundreds of hours in now, and I'm still not really feeling it with Starfield. I can't rule out that once the review is over I might put this game down and never pick it up again. It's just persistently painfully dull, and there's only so much longer I can continue hoping for that Bethesda magic to show up around the next corner. I'm going to assume that survival mode is incoming and already in the works. I mean, let's be honest, in the current game you can just spam 1 hour sleep sessions to get fully healed and well rested XP bonus, so certain mechanics like food are largely pointless at the moment, especially once you've taken certain regenerative perks. Similarly, most of the player housing is utterly pointless if you have a single bunk on your spaceship. But being a veteran of survival mode in Fallout, once saving is bound exclusively to sleeping in a bed, suddenly that little shack with a flea-infested cot can become useful. Honestly, there is a shit ton of redundant features in this game which I predict only exist in their current form, so that later they will be meaningful and essential and incorporated when they roll out the free survival mode patch at some time, I predict, in the new year. But I shit you not, there is so much evidence in the game that they are preparing for survival mode that it's a given. It will be introduced in a later patch. In fact, many of the in-game mechanics will only really become truly relevant when survival mode is eventually rolled out. Trust me on this, I may be an outcast from the cult of Bethesda, but I still know how the church works. The food still exists despite all the non-buff food being virtually useless. There are strategically placed beds in the strangest locations. But as I said before, I think they've already made some design choices that will preemptively break the survival mode. If we were to try and pluck out any of Starfield's significant strengths, I would say it's in the long game and the essence of mastery. In fact, I would say that possibly the real strength of Starfield is in the post-mastery sandbox, when you at least start to feel like you've got the hang of it all. Make no mistake, there is some fun to be had in the game whilst you are still fumbling around though. Making my first base was horrible, but it did start to get strangely satisfying when my many hours of fucking around, rewiring and tinkering finally paid off and started cranking out an endless string of resources. The resources were mostly valueless shit. That was depressing. But I could at least see where the little RPG home building fantasy was potentially heading, and the many days of gaming that could be wasted making your little bases and decorating them with pot plants. Fuck knows, I don't know what people do. Obviously the biggest reason why anyone would even bother to make bases at first is to make a little iron and aluminium factory so you can crank out many thousands of adaptive frames per hour so you can cheese the XP grind. But at least I'm honest about it. Following from this, the first time I really started experiencing a sensation equivalent to fun was after my base building was underway. Naturally, I then started trying to establish easy routes to the closest shops so I could sell my pointless low value crap. This naturally led me into a little loop of exploration and formulating my own in-game to-do list in the local sector, and that right there was my first little Dunning-Kruger moment. On hard mode, with the perks I had chosen, or failed to choose correctly, most of the quest-related combat was a slow and miserable affair at first. But now I had my little low-level solar system to explore, I could check out all of the locations, find the closest shops, maybe clear out the spaces in the habs near to my base, and scan all the local moons and planets. And that right there was the first time I felt like I was getting the hang of this. Although I would note that as someone with mid-5 figures of hours sunk into Bethesda games, and as a dude who normally plays Fallout in survival mode, I was somewhat perplexed at why I was finding the combat so hard, and that it had taken me nearly 100 hours of fucking hard graft just to experience some actual fun in this video game. Now there is one major spoiler that I'm going to avoid. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then I advise you to discover it yourself in-game. But if you do know what I'm talking about, then the following statement will hopefully make sense. At the end of the game there is a certain reveal, and certain big things can happen if you choose them. Many of the design choices in Starfield make a bit more sense once you realise where it's all heading. Nudge nudge, wink wink. The cripplingly slow XP gain, the sometimes laborious pacing, the amount of padding and scale in this expansive world, and the general feeling that this game is operating on geological time compared to general player expectations. So where am I going with this? Now, I have not done this thing at Endgame, and I'm not sure if it's a masterstroke or a creative shit pie, so I will reserve judgment for now. But I can certainly appreciate that die-hard fans of this game would like it, and also how the general pace on later playthroughs might adopt a more experiential tone. Ergo, for some, this game is going to put the roleplay back into RPG. Enough said. But until certain things like outposts have a purpose, travelling across large distances comes at a cost, and there is real danger that you can't jump drive away from in half a second, survival mode is not going to have any point. Now, Starfield also has a big flow problem. Frequently the flow of the game can be as make or break as a game itself. Just look at how miserable Call of Duty or Battlefield becomes when there's nobody queuing for the type of match you want. These games try and optimise the system so that you barely have enough time to think between matches and activities. Well, Starfield screws that up to a majestic degree. I arrive at a killer to do a quest. I decide to grab some minerals whilst I'm there. I buy half of them, get over encumbered, so drop those back at the ship. 3 loading screens. I dash back, grab the next lot from the shop with a loading screen, dash back to the ship, 4 more. Then I realise I forgot the cesium, and go back and get that, 4 more. Then I head to the bank for the quest, where there is a loading screen. Then I head to the location of the quest, where there is another loading screen. Now, just a quick trip to the shops on my way to start a quest has involved an unskippable cutscene when I got out of my chair to go to the cargo hold, 11 loading screens, and about 10 minutes of my time just to grab a few fucking rocks en route to a quest pickup. And this is frankly entertaining compared to dealing with the shitty vendors. Selling 3 stacks worth of adaptive frames at the clinic involves 6 cutscenes and at least 6 24-hour sleep cycles. And that is this game's flow problem. Sometimes you can drop on for an hour and spend more than half of that time just running between point A and point B, chaining through loading screens, watching cutscenes, running and pausing because you're over encumbered, and spamming sleep cycles so the vendor resets. It sucks the crusty sweat off a dead female SJW's balls. As I keep stressing, quantity has a quality all of its own, for better and for worse. And say what you like about Starfield, but it's insanely big, and this leads me to possibly a very damning compliment for Starfield. It is essentially a Fisher-Price activity centre of video games. There is no single part of this kid's toy that will keep a small child entertained for more than a few seconds. I mean, how interesting can one spinning wheel be? The genius is that it has lots of crap things in it. So after a few seconds of spinning the wheel, they can ring the bell, and after a few seconds of that, move the little turtle. It's chaining distractions, just long enough for the kid to dribble, burble, do a little shit in its pants, and then, courtesy of poor short-term memory, it can go back to spinning the wheel again, like it's never done it before. Or, to use a slightly less abstract example, Starfield is like a reasonably shit, slightly run-down fairground park full of old and not particularly impressive rides. There is not a single bloody ride or activity that would motivate someone to make a special trip here to try it out. However, and this is a complimentary however, it's one entrance price at the door and then everything is free. There are lots of rides to try out, most of them only last a few minutes, but there are lots. None of them are particularly special, but there's lots of them, and they're free. The Ferris wheel ain't that big, and the view is a car park on one side and a sewage works on the other. The Hall of Mirrors is rather dated, and the candy floss tastes slightly of rat, with a hint of bankruptcy. But you paid for your ticket at the door, and you can happily waste a whole day here, because there are lots of mediocre and subpar activities to bounce between, and it's all included in the cover price. That is Starfield in a nutshell. Bethesda gathered up all its old, slightly antiquated fairground rides, put it all in one giant amusement park, and charged you once at the door. And the player will hopefully bounce around between the different rides fast enough not to notice that none of them are particularly that much fun, and quite a few of them are a bit shit. And here is a guilty admission. After about 100 hours of self-flagellation and concerted masochism, I actually started to vaguely enjoy pootling around in this game. I dressed up my crew so they looked like nonces. I built one of those invincible ship designs that break the combat mechanics, and I was getting used to the fact that every 1 hour of gameplay involves 10 minutes of spamming adaptive frames. But some could rightly say that me having a little bit of fun in this game might in itself be a problem. Because in Fallout 4 I obsessed about base building. In Red Dead Redemption 2 I spent most of my time up in the Grizzlies hunting in the snow, and I still occasionally dust off Death Stranding to do a few delivery runs. I am not normal. I also strongly suspect that I'm unconsciously only still playing Starfield because of the good old days. Like this game will suddenly become amazing and not remain a 4 or 5 out of 10. But I do know this. The next game I find that is half decent will probably cause me to put Starfield down and not play it until the DLC comes out. Science fact. 21 Kilotons Guide to Having a Less Shit Time in Starfield. Before I leave you, I'm going to try and at least say something constructive to help you with the misery of the first 100 hours of this game. So here goes. It should go without saying that you need a boost pack and boost pack training. If you haven't figured that one out, you must be the sort of person who spends 3 weeks playing Call of Duty multiplayer, only to exclaim, "What the fuck? I could have been using guns this whole time." There are literally quests, which are a ball ache if you don't have a boost pack. It's in the promos. It's an essential feature. Get on that shit like a tramp on chips. Invest in certain perks early to start racking up the requirements. Perk points tend to work like this in Starfield. You pick rank 1 of a perk like security, then in order to unlock the next rank you have to pick 5 locks. Now with many perks you can just go out and grind them, but certain perks require you to do stuff that is incidental. Ergo, you can't readily grind them in a hurry because capping the assignment requires things that show up as an incidental occurrence in the environment. So if you see something that is going to require capping in situations that don't come along that easily, and you can't power level it by just making 30 widgets, invest early and get those ticking over. Following from this, leveling up takes an eternity, and possibly that means literally, so pick your perks very carefully. I would even recommend watching some guides before selecting a single one, because wasting 1 perk point is a big deal in this game. Stealth and lockpicking is a no-brainer. Gun crafting and ship modules are essential sooner or later, so knock yourself out. But do some homework. For example, I would argue that ballistic weapons, and particularly long guns, are vastly more useful than, say, pistols and heavy weapons. Similarly, shotguns are bloody great at close range, but tend to do high damage even before perks are applied. Long term, perhaps even endgame, the perk rejuvenation means you naturally bubble up health. Even 1 point in this can be game changing. Think carefully before investing in perks that solely save time or give quality of life improvements. Being able to carry more pointless crap is nice, but you can largely compensate by 1. Being disciplined with what you pick up, 2. Installing more cargo capacity on your ship, 3. Refunding Starfield and playing the Long Dark instead. If in doubt, invest in stealth perks and wear 1 piece of kit with a chameleonic gear perk. Personally, I think the combat in Starfield is a bit balked. Doesn't seem to matter what you do, I always end up trading damage taken for damage done. Stealth mitigates this. Combine this with the shitty AI and you can grind out fights you would otherwise lose. Watch a couple of very simple tutorials on shipbuilding. If you can just save a little money and learn how to upgrade your basic ship so it has more storage, better shields, a few more weapons and an upgraded power plant, it will suddenly become much less horrible and tiresome to play. Now you can hoover up all the crap you find, stow it in your ship, then periodically park it at a base with a vending kiosk and spam sell your shit. When it runs out of credits, run to your ship, sleep for 24 to 48 hours, go back for round 2, 3, 4, 9. Did I mention having 1 captain's quarters or berth on your ship means you get a bed? Bed on ship good. No bed on ship bad. You feel me? Manage your junk carefully. Always a good strategy in my humble opinion. Traditionally I tend to hoover up everything that is not bolted down in Bethesda games and dutifully vendor every single bit of junk at vendors as I go. Not here, because there is a huge price and weight disparity between actual junk and vendor trash. To put it in perspective, on a recent spam selling trip I vended about 120 space pounds of absolute junk garbage for a grand total of 200 credits. That is a lot of weight and fuckery for a few thousand credits. A single decent value gun can net you the same money for a tiny fraction of the weight and a lot less clicking. So whilst it is certainly nostalgic to pick up every roll of gaffer tape and desk fan, resist the urge. Inventory space is prime real estate in Starfield and putting crap in your bag will no doubt result in pushing valuables out of it. I have ended up leaving guns on the floor because my bag was full of junk. Junk that was worth 1% of the credits that the guns would have netted. Be disciplined about what you pick up because it's not just a waste of time, it is literally going to end up costing you both time and money. Similarly, every few hours check your bags. The inventory system in Starfield has a memory leak, as they say. Random crap, bits and bobs, and more importantly, resources and ship parts will start to build up. Set a weight limit and stick to it. Pay attention to the level of star systems. Because I have air bubbles in my cranium, I completely fail to notice that each system has a player level, so I would faceplant into areas way above my level and struggle. Farm and dominate low level areas until such time as you have stealth perks, stealth gear, and a big, fat, high alpha damage gun with a suppressor. Skill is fleeting, and based on age and sobriety, but cheesing is eternal. Manually save the game often. The autosave feature has a habit of saving just after something has gone wrong. It will also lull you into a false sense of security by saving regularly for hours, and the very second you trust it, you will die and suddenly discover that it saved when you entered the complex, and now you have to clear the whole fucking building again. Thanks, Todd. Always save before doing vendoring. It's really easy to sell the wrong thing by accident or buy stuff by mistake. Be very careful, because the UI is ridiculously bad. Focus on the things you enjoy the most. Lots of people are saying, hammer the main quest line, then go and explore. Now there are certain benefits of doing some of it, but completing it is more of a nuanced issue. I would suggest that it's a much more simple equation. If you do manage to find something in Starfield that you enjoy doing, then focus on that. Even if that might be playing the Cyberpunk expansion or getting a refund on Starfield. Emergency grav jumps are your friend. I make a habit of keeping at least one energy unit up on my grav drive. That way, if I get ganked on arrival, I can hit the map key, set in a course to anywhere and jump out in a few seconds. Running away skills are essential in space, until you have made some weird L-shaped spaceship that breaks the shitty vehicle AI. Starfield, for all its wokery and current daying, is quite true to life in some strange ways. You know how sometimes you look around at all the crazy shit in the news and think, wouldn't it be nice to go and live off-grid in some log cabin in the mountains somewhere, away from civilization and all of these fucking idiots? Well, that is certainly what I ended up doing in Starfield, figuratively speaking. If you find yourself getting annoyed with all the tiresome idiots in the city and the relentless lecturing from the girl bosses, don't forget you can always build your own tiny little base on the moon of Androphon in the Narian system. Just find a spot that has both iron and aluminium, make yourself nice and comfy, and spam adaptive frames until this whole horrible mess of a game is over. Well, I guess it's time to wrap up this disgusting kebab and throw it at a passing police car. Playing Starfield at times strangely reminded me of the profoundly philosophical 1991 Chinese art house movie Life on a String. It was boring, there wasn't enough nudity in it, and everyone spoke foreign. But it did make one valuable point. Despite sleeping through most of it, I think the plot went something like this. It's a story about this blind banjo player who is given a prescription by a Chinese medicine man in his youth. The prescription is placed inside a compartment of the man's musical instrument. The medicine man tells him that when he has played the banjo so much that he has worn out 1,000 strings, he can use the prescription to restore his sight. When he finally breaks his 1,000th string, now an old man, he toddles off to the local chemist to get his medicine made up. Now apparently this was supposed to be some ancient remedy for restoring sight, handed down by the ancient apothecaries, but sure enough, it turned out to be a blank piece of paper. He had been lied to in order to give him a purpose in life, so he would end up becoming one of the greatest musicians in China. But in essence, his whole life had been a bullshit manipulation done by someone supposedly acting in his best interests. Well, Starfield is a bit like Life on a String. You have been lied to, and you may well continue to potle through the game because of the promise of a better tomorrow that will most likely not come for you. You have been led astray by the hype train and the shills, but this is not the game you were told it would be. So you might well keep on trundling down the road in the hope that it will get better, and a lot of people will confuse being busy with being entertained. And some people will probably enjoy the whole process, because just like the old Chinese banjo fella, being lied to can sometimes give you a purpose, until the moment that you find out that you were lied to. But make no mistake, the game is, sadly, a lie. I think it's clear now that Bethesda has lost sight of its own magic formula. What made Fallout and Skyrim great was the fact that you could head out into the most obscure corner of the map and there would be something there. Sometimes you might be stumbling around some old building on the edge of the map and find something spectacular that might explain lore or start a quest line. It was the fine curation of the content layered on top of the expansive world that made it all seem so magical and immersive. They made huge and admittedly sometimes slightly sparse worlds, but they were coherent, internally consistent, and you genuinely felt like you were immersed in a place. Well, clearly the people at Bethesda who had the skills to do that shit have been replaced with interns and new hires. Everything is all one thing or another. The open world is expansive but characterless, auto-generated gloop. And the curated areas are the constricted primary locations where you feel boxed in, e.g. the cities and settlements. But you never seem to get both at the same time, and it's a harsh transition between them. You don't have that Bethesda open world magic, where even in the arse end of beyond you might stumble across something of significance. Starfield is a mishmash of curated, anodyne, safe space content, and procedurally generated meaningless nonsense timesync content, and it's all chopped up into little cells and separated by loading screens and cutscenes. Bethesda has lost their own plot. Starfield tells its stories like instructions on medicine bottles. The story and lore is not interesting and engaging. It barely makes sense, and it's not supported by anything you experience in the world. You just put up with it. It's not an interesting story or something that will improve your personal journey. You just read the leaflet that comes with the pills, because you need to read the warnings. It's not a good read. You just go through the motions because you have to, and sadly, most of the time, you'll be skipping through most of the dialogue anyway. Quantity has a quality all of its own. Aquila City left me cold initially, and that was probably my favourite town. But after many hours of play, I found myself back there one night, and then bumped into some rando having a conversation, got embroiled in some side quest, got dragged around various backwaters of the town that I didn't even know existed, spotted about 10 places I needed to check out later, and then I got it. A serious amount of work was done here to pad out every single corner of this town. I'm talking New Vegas levels of depth, where the longer you hang around, the more you find out that most NPCs will at some point intersect with quests, activities and knowledge. And that's when it hit me. The game is a little bit like Skyrim in space, only they took the Skyrim map, divvied it up across 50 worlds, and procedurally generated the rest of the universe as padding. There was a lot of effort put into specific parts of the game, and they've certainly gone through the motions. But the game doesn't have any heart and soul. And most of the quests and stories and lore in this game are bland and utterly tedious because they didn't want to trigger anyone. And when you end up not giving a shit about anyone or anything in a video game, that's a problem. I found myself picking contrarian outcomes and obnoxious choices in the dialogue just to watch people suffer. I just wanted to watch the world burn. I just about managed to generate a little affection for the Freestar Collective, so that was nice. But even they were a parody of the libertarian Old West, with muddy streets and treated like they were slightly backward. As I stated earlier, it's not any particular thing that makes this game woke trash, it's the sum totality of relentless box ticking that wears down the player. Starfield is so eye-gougingly woke that it would not have been a surprise if Antifa had been one of the factions and one of the Radiant quests was to help BLM burn down businesses in their neighbourhoods. There are no huge moral dilemmas here, like Do you set off the nuke in Fallout 3? Or choose between serious harm? Oh no, that would be too triggering and controversial. It's all cartoon characters and cartoon character writing. There was one moment in the game where I suddenly realised how this ESG shit was just relentlessly washing over me. I was running around trying to save the planet. I had my bisexual annoying companion by my side, who seemed to spend half her time mithering me, and the other half of the time expecting me to chat her up. No thanks, I don't want to get me too'd. I also had my transsexual clone in tow, periodically barking instructions at me, and I had just endured a series of meetings where I had yet another series of orders barked at me by not one, but two different senior girl bosses in a row. And that's when it dawned on me. I just realised I had just spent hours running from pillar to post, being the only person in the group who didn't have gender dysphoria or non-binary sexual identity, having orders barked at me, and I was the one person doing all of the hard work. I felt like a male plumber being called to a feminist conference to fix the blocked toilet, knowing damn well that they were all standing there scowling, judging me and waiting for me to wolf whistle so they could report me, when the reality was that I was probably the only single person in the building doing anything fucking useful. On a subliminal level, Starfield is demoralising in the literal political sense, and soul-crushing with its blandness and politically correct agenda. I think these woke pricks at Bethesda are so far up their own wheatgrass enema irrigated arses that it never occurred to them what the player power fantasy would feel like. The player power fantasy in Starfield is specifically catering to cucks, simps and people who like to have strong female characters boss them around all day long. For normal people, it's all a bit shit really. And all of this is constantly, subtly reinforced by the way that specific characters are cast by race and gender. Starfield reads like someone watched an old sexist and vaguely racist 1950s black and white movie and they hired a bunch of bitter activists to flip the script. It feels like ideological revenge porn. It's subtle, but relentless. It's low-key, but you will notice it. And you eventually start to realise how to articulate it. This game has not so well hidden tones of equity, and equity is really a euphemism for ideological and political revenge. This goes far beyond issues of character creation or pronouns. It's hard baked into the DNA of this whole game. I question the wisdom of making a video game that only becomes vaguely enjoyable after 100 to 200 hours. Not a particularly controversial take really, but I will acknowledge the following. Perhaps that's the point. People kept playing the Elder Scrolls and Fallout games for years, sinking thousands of hours into them, because of their replayability, but more importantly, because the worlds were engaging and virtually impossible to fully explore. Unless you were like me and literally had printouts of where all the skill magazines were in New Vegas and kept them all systematically. Maybe Bethesda realised that the important issue here was the long game and making a title that people could sink thousands and thousands of hours into over many years, and then just start again. Maybe this was their long game, and everything else worked backwards from this end goal. Maybe developers legitimately sat around a table and discussed how the game would feel based on the number of playthroughs and hours per playthrough. Maybe someone even said in a meeting, yeah, the first 50 hours for a new player will kinda suck, but if they stick with it, blah blah blah. I mean, these are the guys who've released Skyrim 15 plus times in multiple formats, across multiple platforms, over more than a decade. Of course they were looking at the long game, replayability and focusing on the people that will play for hours on end every week and make this their default go-to game / primary hobby. The problem is, if the game ain't fun enough to keep people playing for 10 or 20 hours, who gives a fuck about replayability after 1000 hours? There's going to be about 5 people left playing at this rate. They're going to have to do some serious work with the DLC to save this game. They need to add a fuck ton of controversial, morally challenging, exciting and basically non-Starfield content to salvage this project. Right now it's getting a pasting on Metacritic and a kicking in the Steam user reviews, and I bet their little censorious peons on the subreddit are deleting shit faster than Hillary Clinton's emails. I would advise most people to pass on Starfield and play something that can offer some kind of gratification without investing a serious proportion of their life into the game. But there is another reason why I think they're playing the long game here, because Starfield is absolutely future-proofed for the woke progressive World Economic Forum / UN 2030 agenda. This game is dripping with it harder than my t-shirt is dripping with curry sauce. But here is the rub. Personally, I don't think the future is going to be woke. I reckon we're about 10 bank runs, one global financial collapse, and possibly a regional war away from social and economic crisis. Whenever shit like that happens, all this progressive stuff goes straight out of the window. Woke politics is a luxury of affluence, and I think that in the near future, Western societies will reject progressive woke bullshit, strike down woke laws, tell the World Economic Forum to fuck off back to Davos, and get back on with the serious business of pure capitalism. Just exactly like they did during the last financial crash, where they quickly toe-punted all this woke shit out of the window for an entire decade because they suddenly realised that making profit was more important. Only next time, it's going to be worse, more angry and less forgiving. Let's face it, we've already got to the point where vigilantes are destroying surveillance cameras used to police climate bullshit in London. Some US counties want to secede from woke states, and some states want to secede from the Union. And across the developed West, there is a rapid shift to more, and I say this loosely, right-wing political parties. In short, people are sick of this woke shit. So good luck selling 15 versions of this game in the future, because despite it having some good mechanics and some interesting shit to explore, when this game is 10 years old, there is a great danger that it will be a woke anachronism. In 10 years' time, Starfield might stand as a monument to how video games went so far off the rails during the current wokegasm and trends in idiot politics. I think another problem with Starfield is both obvious and in everyone's faces. People put up with all the flaws of Skyrim because it was a great world full of dragons, magic and mythology. People put up with all the flaws in Fallout 4 because it was a fascinating post-apocalyptical world, where the lore and the storytelling perfectly balanced optimism with the bleak nature of total societal collapse. They were both rags to riches stories, set in wonderful fantasy worlds, where you carved out your own little place to call home. In Starfield you get hired on day one, given a company car, a gig job and told what to do. You can practically feel the pizza boxes being pushed into your chest and the address slip pushed into your top pocket. It's just not a fun way to do it. In Starfield, people are expected to put up with a load of nonsense despite having to bimble around in a sterile, woke, anodyne, uncontroversial space environment that looks like it hasn't even caught up with modern TV sci-fi, let alone created anything new. Starfield is a world of pronouns, equity, girl bosses, and evil cis white male antagonists. It stinks of the desperation of not wanting to get cancelled for doing something offensive. Despite being in the future, it lacks essential technology from now. I can't sell my shit online, drive around on moons, and you spend most of your time jogging. People might lay there in bed at night thinking, I really wish I lived in the world of Fallout or Skyrim. But nobody's ever going to say that about Starfield. People of Reset Era might, but not normal people. Nobody's going to fantasise about being teleported to a future world where they can live in a crate, eat mealworms and get bossed around by a succession of miserable girl bosses. Political correctness is the death of genuine creativity. In many ways it's antithetical to creativity. It crushes risk-taking, generates a climate of fear and comes with a long list of do's and don'ts. So we shouldn't be surprised that the world of Starfield has about as much character and genuine emotion as a corporate training video for a franchise milkshake machine. Starfield is the perfect example of all the joy, mystery, and soul being sucked out of a video game before it's even launched. And take this warning seriously, it is painfully fucking woke, in subtle, obvious, and more importantly subliminal levels. I'd sometimes refer to this as racial and sexual topography, and a perfect example of this is Netflix movies and TV shows. When they're writing and casting these shows, pay careful attention to the race, gender and sexuality of the characters and the roles they play, because these are not random and accidental. If there is an ensemble of kids and one of them is a dumbass and the butt of all the jokes, that role is almost certainly going to the white male kid. The end result is when you play Starfield, whilst doing quests, you will spend probably most of your time being barked at by a gaggle of multi-ethnic girl bosses, and once you start to notice it, it gets really annoying very quickly. It becomes grating because it's done so relentlessly that the subliminal messaging starts to become obvious. There is a matrix of human qualities that include things like good, evil, competent, incompetent, authoritative, subordinate, smart, and stupid. And when creating characters, they are assigning them to align with this grid, roughly according to their ethnicity and gender. It's not an accident that the utterly annoying idiot that follows you around is a straight white male who even asserts his straightness in conversation.
Is it really you?
It's not a coincidence that the evil corporate boss types you run into are almost exclusively straight white dudes. These were casting choices, and these choices were deliberate. It's not an accident that you spend so much time standing in rooms, getting girl-bossed by strong female protagonists. I think in one quest, which I won't spoil, it had 4 major characters in it. The 2 ethnically diverse girl bosses who are in charge and boss you around, as usual, the servile and obedient head of security, who is an ethnically diverse male, and the bloke who dies. Cis white male. Naturally. And this kind of shit lazy trope repeats relentlessly through the game. Subservient males. Expendable white males. Girl bosses. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Seriously, keep an eye out for this casting. Doing a quest with a miserable evil scumbag? White male. Strong noble leader? Almost certainly female. Probably diverse. Once you see it, you will start walking into rooms and correctly predicting approximate character roles based on sex and ethnicity. So if I had to score this game, I would do it like this. For members of Reset Era, 11 out of 10. Fantastic game. Men are shit and women are in charge. What more needs to be said? For normal gamers who believed the hype and honestly thought they could fly around in space and explore like any other normal space game, for them this is probably going to be a 3 or 4 out of 10. For someone like me, who enjoyed the metagame and can stomach playing for hundreds of hours to get there, I think I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. For people who love Bethesda and worship Todd Howard, for those people, who cares what score I give the game? I doubt they're still paying attention. Since the moment I mentioned Todd Howard, they probably slipped their hand into their pants and they're drifting off into some fantasy right now. I've done my best to review this game and try to be as fair as possible. But I just can't rule out the fact that I might drop this game like a sack of shit about 30 minutes after I've finished this review. If there was anyone who could possibly find all the positives in Starfield, I would like to think it was me, and I have done the very best that I could to highlight them. I have absolutely given this game my best shot, and I was desperately hoping to give this game a good ribbing and then eventually find the good in this game. But I'm very sorry to say, Starfield is a big, bland, boring, woke time sink. If you are stuck in a jail cell for the next 20 years with nothing else to do, then it's a bargain. For everyone else, if you don't have OCD or a shipbuilding fetish, You will be very disappointed. Sorry, but there it is. Well, on reflection, I think I might shit-can Starfield until significant DLC comes out. Besides, a mate of mine got me the Mass Effect Special Edition, and that's most likely a much better use of my time. But for now, good luck, and happy hunting.